Cold wind scraped across the mountain ridge like a blade, dragging dust, silence, and dread toward the firing line where 13 elite snipers stood frozen in disbelief. The air tasted metallic, sharp with failure, sharp with the weight of what none of them could accomplish. A 4,000-meter shot, an impossible distance where even the earth seemed to curve away in defiance, waited untouched on the far horizon, mocking every attempt they had made since sunrise. The 13th miss still hung in the air like a bruise. The bullet had vanished somewhere into the shimmering emptiness, far from the distant steel plate that looked no bigger than a coin. The men lowered their rifles with the stiff, defeated movements of soldiers, stripped bare in front of their peers. No one spoke. The shame lived too loudly in the space between their breaths. At the far end of the ridge, brass casings rolled to a stop near the boots of a woman who had been invisible to most of them all morning. She had said nothing, done nothing to attract attention. She simply watched quiet, still, listening to the wind as if it carried secrets only she understood. Her uniform bore the subdued patches of a Navy SEAL operator, but her presence was so unassuming that many forgot she was even there. Which made it worse. What happened next? Colonel Reeves' voice cut through the tension, low and displeased. He spoke with that measured calm that carried more judgment than shouting ever could. 13 of the best marksmen on this continent, and not a single hit. He didn't raise his voice, yet each soldier felt the sting. The world expected excellence from them. Today they gave it failure. A few men exchanged glances, frustration tightening their throats. Someone muttered that the wind was impossible. Another blamed mirage. Someone else claimed the target was too small. Excuses rose like smoke, thin and desperate. No one noticed the woman inhale slowly, as if steadying herself for something inevitable. Then the colonel said the one sentence that made every jaw lock. Maybe the shot isn't meant to be taken today, or maybe... His eyes drifted toward the quiet woman, as if he had sensed the storm stirring inside her. Maybe no one else here is capable of it. The words packed humiliation like gunpowder. A few men stiffened. One laughed dryly under his breath. "That's 4,000 meters, sir. Physics doesn't bend for ego." Another added, not quietly enough, "Even our best couldn't do it. What's left, a miracle." The wind answered for them, cold, exacting, carrying the scent of impending change. The woman shifted her weight, barely perceptible, but in the heavy silence it felt like thunder. Her hands were steady at her sides, her heartbeat steady in her chest, yet her thoughts churned with the memory of every impossible moment she had been asked to endure. She had survived things these men would never know, but skill meant little when wrapped inside a quiet face and a body people underestimated. She stepped forward, not boldly, not dramatically, just one calm step that made every conversation choke to a halt. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, yet the words carried through the wind with the clarity of a rifle shot. "Let me do it." The men blinked as if they hadn't heard correctly. A few frowned, waiting for the punchline. Someone exhaled a scoff, but it dissipated quickly when they saw her expression calm, unshaken, steady as the mountain beneath her boots. A strange tension rippled across the ridge. The snipers didn't know whether to feel amused, threatened, or embarrassed. The colonel studied her, eyes narrowing not in doubt, but in recognition. For the first time all morning, it felt like the air leaned in. The quiet SEAL woman walked toward the firing position, each step measured, each breath aligned with a deeper rhythm inside her, one that did not care for the murmurs behind her or the weight of expectations. She did not seek attention. She sought precision. And somewhere on the far horizon, a steel plate waited for the only bullet that had a chance of finding it. The firing platform felt different beneath her boots, less like a stage and more like a truth she'd been walking toward for years. The air sharpened around her, dense with the unspoken disbelief of the men she passed. They shifted subtly, trying to school their faces, but the doubt was there, in the tight set of their jaws, in the faint smirks they didn't fully hide. It wasn't cruelty, it was habit. A lifetime of assuming quiet meant incapable. She laid a hand on the prone mat, feeling its rough fabric warm under the sun, as if acknowledging her. She lowered herself slowly, like a ritual, each motion carved with purpose rather than pride. The rifle lay in front of her, a massive, meticulously engineered beast built for extreme distances. It had defeated every man who touched it that morning. Now it waited, silent, as if measuring her intentions. The colonel approached from behind, his presence a calm shadow. He didn't offer encouragement. He didn't need to. His silence was its own kind of respect. The woman closed her eyes. All at once, the mountain faded. The murmurs died. The sting of failure evaporated. She allowed her mind to sink past the noise, past the disbelief, past the surface-level judgments of those around her. Her breathing slowed, in, out, deep, steady, precise, like she had learned to breathe underwater during drown-proofing. Like she had learned to breathe in chaos, in fire, in the kind of darkness that would have shattered most people. The world became the wind. She felt it before she heard it. The subtle shift in currents sweeping across the valley below, a layered mosaic of temperature, direction, resistance. A 4,000-meter shot wasn't about aim. It was about reading a language almost no one understood. The air spoke in invisible patterns, and she listened. Behind her, one of the snipers muttered, "She won't even be able to spot her own impact at that distance." Another responded, softer, "Doesn't matter. Bull, it won't even stay stable that far out." They spoke as though she couldn't hear, but she did. The words didn't wound her, they grounded her. They reminded her of where she had come from, of every room she had entered where people underestimated her before they even knew her name. Being doubted was familiar. Being overlooked was a home she had learned to rebuild herself inside. Her eyes opened. The target shimmered in the heat, barely a fleck of silver across the valley. Mirage waves floated above it like restless ghosts. But she didn't look at the steel. She looked at everything between here and there, the rising thermals, the crosswinds funneled by distant rock formations, the way the sun warmed one side of the valley more than the other. She saw a path, a thin, fragile thread carved through variables most people couldn't even identify. She let the thread settle in her mind, a line not drawn on paper, but felt beneath her ribs. She gently adjusted the bipod, shifted the buttstock against her shoulder, settled her cheek onto the stock with the softness of a whispered promise. Her hands were steady, her pulse was a calm tide. Someone behind her whispered, "Is she actually going to take the shot?" Another replied, "She'll back out once she sees how bad the mirage is." But she didn't back out. She aligned the crosshairs not where the target was, but where it would need to be by the time the bullet finally arrived after its long, impossible journey. The colonel watched her with a stillness that unnerved the others. He recognized the posture. It was the posture of someone who had learned to survive by studying what others ignored. The wind shifted again. She inhaled slowly. The air held its breath with her. Then she whispered something too quiet for the others to hear. Only the mountain heard it. A promise to her past, a challenge to her present, a declaration to the shot itself. Her finger brushed the trigger, gentle as a sigh. Nothing about her movement was dramatic, but every man behind her felt the moment change. Not because she was about to attempt the impossible, but because she believed the impossible was already obedient to her. When she exhaled, the valley seemed to narrow, drawing the world into a single, inevitable line. The shot waited, and she was ready to command it. Her heartbeat slowed until it felt like the quiet ticking of a distant clock, unhurried, unbothered, untouchable. She had trained for this kind of calm, cultivated it through nights when her life had depended on silence instead of strength. Now that same stillness wrapped around her like armor. As she settled her finger onto the trigger, the world tightened. The moment stretched thin, trembling on the edge of release. She breathed out. The rifle cracked. Not loudly, not violently, just a clean, decisive break in the air, like the mountain itself had exhaled with her. The recoil nudged her shoulder in a familiar, controlled arc. Dust scattered. Wind shifted in a startled flutter. And the bullet, no larger than a fingertip, began its impossible migration across the valley's yawning distance. For a long second, the men behind her remained in stunned silence. Some stared through their scopes to spot impact. Others just watched the woman, trying to decipher how someone so quiet could carry a presence that now pressed on them like a rising tide. The colonel didn't move. His hands folded behind him, eyes fixed not on the target but on her, as if the outcome mattered less than the truth she had already revealed by taking the shot. Far out in the valley, the bullet cut its path through invisible layers of heat, pressure, and shifting winds. It drifted, dipped, drifted again, dancing between physics and possibility. At 4.0 meters, even bullets questioned their purpose. They slowed, wavered, struggled to hold stability as distance pulled at them like a tide. She watched the valley, expression serene. She wasn't tracking the bullet by sight, no one could at that range, but by intuition, by her deep sense of how the world breathed. Yet after 10 seconds, murmurs began to stir behind her. One sniper hissed, "It's going to fall short." Another said, "Wind's too strong on the left side. It'll drift wide." Someone else, unable to hold back his skepticism, exhaled sharply. "Everyone's trying to be polite, but come on, no one makes a shot like this." Their doubt felt like tiny pebbles thrown at a stone wall, annoying but powerless. The woman didn't blink. Her gaze stayed fixed on the shimmering horizon. A long moment passed, then another, then a faint, almost imperceptible metallic ping rolled back through the valley. It arrived late, as if unsure it wanted to interrupt the silence, but when it did, every man froze. One sniper's hand twitched against his scope. Another's breath caught in his chest. The colonel's eyes narrowed slightly, not in doubt, but in acknowledgement. Because the sound had not been imagined, it had been earned. The bullet had struck just barely, at the very edge of the steel plate. A hit, at a distance that humiliated logic. But the whispers behind her weren't relief or admiration. They were disbelief wrapped in denial. That could have been a ricochet. No way that counted. It clipped the outer frame. Luck, pure luck. Even a blind shot could graze a plate. The woman did not turn toward them. She didn't need to. Their reactions were familiar, almost predictable. People often reached for doubt when truth upset the order of things. She had spent a lifetime hearing others explain away what she had achieved. Yet she felt no anger, only stillness. She gently worked the bolt, sliding out the empty casing. The hot brass rolled onto the mat beside her, shining faintly in the sun. She examined it not for reassurance but for ritual before letting it fall from her fingers. The colonel stepped forward, voice steady. That was a hit. His certainty silenced the whispers, but only for a moment. Even with a hit, the men looked unsettled, as if the valley had betrayed them by siding with her. She reached for another round. The simple movement drew a ripple of surprise from the watching snipers. One asked, "She's taking another shot." Another whispered, "Why? She already proved herself." But she didn't load the second round to prove anything. She loaded it because she had not come for luck or doubt or permission. She had come for precision. Her breath settled into its familiar rhythm again, as natural as a tide pulling back from shore. The weight of judgment, expectation, and disbelief fell away. Only the wind remained, threading through her awareness like an old companion. If the first shot had silenced them, the second shot would change them. And as she nestled her cheek once more against the stock, and let her soul tune itself to the world's hidden language, every man behind her felt something they had not expected, a quiet, rising fear. Not of her, but of the truth they were about to witness. The valley seemed to lean toward her the moment she chambered the second round, as if the wind itself wished to witness what she would do next. A hush draped across the ridge, no orders, no murmurs, no protests. Even the men who had spent the morning dismissing her felt a subtle tightening in their chests, an instinctive awareness that whatever came next would leave no shadow of doubt behind. The woman steadied her body once more, sinking into the rifle as if it were an extension of her own bones. Nothing about her posture hinted at triumph from the first shot. There was no pride in her eyes, no need to bask in the surprise she had already ignited. Instead, she carried an almost monastic calm, a focus so pure it felt sacred. She didn't look at the target, not directly. She observed the valley's quiet movements, the shifting light across distant ridges, the subtle ripples of heat drifting upward like translucent curtains. She measured the world not in numbers, but in understanding. Every breath she drew seemed to align her pulse with the unseen rhythms of the landscape. Behind her, a young sniper swallowed thickly. "If she hits twice, no one can say anything." Another whispered back, barely audible, "No one will dare." But the woman wasn't listening to their words. Her attention wrapped around the wind, its slow, patient patterns, its quiet rebellions at different elevations. She tracked a gentle southerly drift entering the valley like a curious stranger. She felt it tug at the path her bullet would take, nudging it in ways invisible to the eye. She adjusted a fraction of an inch. The colonel watched her with a kind of quiet awe. There was respect in his gaze, but something more, recognition. As though he understood that this wasn't merely skill. This was a language she had spent years learning in silence, the kind of ability that bloomed only in those who listened more than they spoke. Her finger settled lightly on the trigger. Time exhaled. The shot broke, a crisp, precise release that echoed down the valley like a whispered promise. The recoil nudged her shoulder, but she did not flinch, did not blink, did not chase the echo of the round. She remained utterly still, as if the bullet still carried a part of her with it across the great distance. Everyone else leaned forward. One sniper gripped his spotting scope so tightly his knuckles paled. Another forgot to breathe. Even those who had dismissed her earlier found themselves involuntarily whispering small prayers, not for her, but for the unraveling of their own assumptions. Seconds passed, long, taut, unforgiving seconds. The bullet danced across temperature shifts and rising thermals. It drifted in and out of stability. The slightest breath of wind touched it like a sculptor's hand. Then a clean, unmistakable ring rolled across the valley. No delay this time, no ambiguity, no question of luck. A perfect center hit. The sound washed over the ridge like a revelation. It silenced excuses. It swallowed every whisper of doubt. The men watching her felt something collapse inside them, not pride, but the old scaffolding of assumptions they had built around what was possible, around who could achieve it. The woman finally lifted her head from the rifle, blinking slowly, like someone waking from a trance. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The truth lay in the echo still hanging in the air. One of the snipers stepped back, breath trembling. Another lowered his rifle, eyes locked on her with something between disbelief and admiration. A few stared at the ground, confronting a humility they hadn't expected to feel today. The colonel stepped forward, boots crunching against the gravel. He didn't congratulate her, he didn't praise her. He simply looked at her with quiet acknowledgement, an unspoken salute between two warriors who understood the weight of discipline, silence, and mastery. Twice, one sniper whispered, his voice breaking, "She hit it twice." Another corrected him softly, "No, she didn't hit it. She owned it." The woman rose to her feet, dusting her hands lightly. The valley's wind curled around her like a bow of respect. No triumph radiated from her, only a steady calm, a calm born from years of being underestimated, from the long march through doubt to the peak of undeniable truth. She walked past the line of stunned men. Some lowered their eyes, some nodded faintly. All of them felt something shift inside them, something painful, something necessary. As she passed the colonel, He offered only a single sentence, not loud, not ceremonial, just true. You were waiting for the moment they stopped hearing you so they could finally see you. She paused, but only for a breath. Her reply was soft, carrying the weight of every silent trial she had endured. They didn't need to see me, only the shot. Then she continued walking down the ridge, leaving behind 13 humbled snipers, a shaken valley, and 2 impossible shots that rewrote what they believed about skill, precision, and the quiet power of those the world underestimates. A legend had been born, not in noise or pride, but in silence. And in the whisper of a woman who once said, "Let me do it."